My name is Tom Powers. I'm the artistic director of the festival. Let me say some important thank yous to our leadership sponsor, Netflix, to our major sponsors, A&E Indie Films, Apple, HBO Documentary Films, History Films, and Canopy, to our supporting sponsors, National Geographic Documentary Films, Showtime Documentary Films, and Topic Studios, and finally to our leading media sponsors, New York Magazine and WNET. I also want to give a special thanks to the distributor BritBox for supplying us this film, 63 Up. Today we held our annual Visionaries Tribute. This is the 6th time we've done that at Doc NYC, and one of the things we do at the Visionaries Tribute is give out some Lifetime Achievement Awards. Today's Lifetime Achievement recipients were Michael Apted and Martin Scorsese. We couldn't be more proud to be showing this preview of Michael's film, and so this is being shown in conjunction with him receiving that Lifetime Achievement Award. If you have an appetite in you for another film tonight, Martin Scorsese's film Rolling Thunder Review about Bob Dylan is playing at 9:15 tonight, so you could make it a double feature. But I was asked the other day by a journalist who was writing about Doc NYC if I could remember the first documentary I saw. And I couldn't point to a documentary that I saw as a youth, but I can remember a series of documentaries that I saw when I was about 19 or 20 years old that really opened my eye to the power of nonfiction filmmaking. And one of those films was 28 Up, which was then a brand new film. And I just thought, wow, like what a power to condense time, to ask questions that are not, political questions. They're not news questions. They're questions that are more about the fundamentals of life. And every 7 years, of course, Michael Apted has been returning to the same people and asking those same questions. And Roger Ebert referred to this as one of the great uses of cinema. What you were saying is when the first one came out, it had some ripples.
Huge ripples, but we never put one and one together to make two. Which it was unbelievable looking back on it that we didn't immediately get it going, because it was one of those programs that changed the nation in a sense. The nation realized it was a very kind of good way of showing people how crummy the society was, without banging it down their throat. Just they could draw their own conclusions from it. Those conclusions were pretty vivid and pretty frightening.
Were those conclusions something that you felt as a young man, or were they things that you were kind of discovering also in the process?
No, I was taught by my mother's milk about this. My mother was, although she was not a professional woman, and she had 3 children and all that sort of stuff, but she was very interested in kind of fair play. And she was the one that, really educated me in it. So, I was there ready for it. And, then it really did turn the nation upside down when it got broadcast. But I still, to this day, don't realize why we didn't move quicker with it. Well, not that we would have done it any different, because we still wanted the 7 years thing. We didn't want to do something that's quick and routine and then let's move on, something that can stay in the mind. And, that's what happened. And so I never forget, after I'd done the first week's shoot on number 2, I spoke to the people who were running Granada and saying, look, I don't want to work in England. I mean, I want to go to America and work, but I have to do this. So I guaranteed to you, this is, I was a child saying this to this big company, saying, you have to do this every 7 years, and I guarantee that I'll be there to do it. And I was. And here I am.
When you were approaching this latest installment, 63 up, was there any sort of new thoughts in your head about doing it? I mean, does it feel routine in a way every 7 years, or does it feel different every 7 years?
It feels different every 7 years because there are different things at work. You know, how are we going to survive? I mean, as a little group, are we? Some of us going to die and all that. So there's always the different atmosphere to it, and also because in some ways each generation of it, has a kind of major element in it. So it's really to pinch that out, and also with this one, I didn't want it to be too nostalgic. I wanted to see, they still had life in them and still had things they wanted to do and still had things that they couldn't get to do and all this. So I didn't want to get it maudlin or, kind of sad or whatever. So I just try to keep the life of it and their character, and they're a good crowd. I mean, the choice of them was really ludicrously fortuitous. Since the first one was just going to be one, we just whizzed out. One I did in London, and another researcher went into Manchester, and then we picked about, 30 people, and then chose from those 30 the sort of 20 or so that we'd have. We had many more than we needed because it was only going to be one show. So, that's what happened. But I mean, I was surprised really how incredibly receptive the British audience were to it, because it was played on it wasn't played on in any arty-farty company. It was played on, the kind of the vulgar network of British television. And so, which was mainly made up of, I don't know, just popular things, and then to the middle of this came this film, which was kind of smart.
Let's take some questions from the audience.
Oh, Charles, you mean? Yeah. Well, he was quite a big event in the third one, because he said he wasn't going to do it anymore. And I was gobsmacked because I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm working for a television company." So I said, "You've got to be kidding." And I handled it quite badly because I was so shocked and crossed about it, because this was this kind of small gift for me to have one of them actually in the business, without me having tried to push him into it. But, and he just wouldn't do it. Which he was the only one really of all of them at any time blankly refused to show up. I thought, he must be mad, because look at he wanted to get into the business, show business, which he did. But I thought, how ridiculous! Here's this opportunity for you to establish yourself in something you really want to be in and do. So it was a mystery to me.
Can you imagine answering questions like this yourself every 7 years to a film crew?
No. No, I mean, I'm groping here because it is a bit tricky to ask the questions and whatever, and not to load them and whatever. So I have to be very careful what I say to them. And I prefer not to say too much. So I don't start lecturing them, and so they go on for a lecture, and before we're done, the whole film is over. But I've forgotten what the question was.
I was asking if you would ever subject yourself to being asked questions.
Oh, I would. I mean, I have to, don't I? I mean, I can't go out and do it. I haven't been asked. But no, I would definitely, I could not turn it down. That would be hypocrisy of the highest order.
All right, let's take a couple more questions. So she's asking about the character John, who felt like some things had been left out of his story about how much he had worked as a young person.
So he'd build this big defense around himself, which included not being honest or open about who he was and what his life was like. We never knew he didn't have a father. The father was dead and all this, so it was a bit of a shock, because he'd always been very, very difficult to get. In fact, he wouldn't speak to me. He was so cross with me after one of them that he said, "I'm never going to speak to you again, but I do want to be in the program." So I said, I can understand that, my friend. But anyway, I was as shocked as you were when he came out with this stuff, which I wasn't interviewing him then because he wouldn't speak to me. Can be pretty difficult in the front line there, dealing with the general public, when getting their own back on you. So it can be tricky. But I was amazed by that. I wish I'd known, because it would have made him much more interesting. The kind of the father figure. He was the father figure in the family at 9 years old. If you know what I mean. I mean, his father had died, and that was that. So that was a bit of a shock. And I thought, well, why did I never get that out? I must have not paid attention, or just took it for. I mean, he's such a colourful character in a way that you can't think that he's, living a life of difficulty and shortage of money and all this. I mean, he didn't give that feeling over at all, but there it was, and he decided to conceal it. But he wouldn't ever speak to me, so that was the one relationship that... he'd speak to me now if he was sat there, but he wouldn't speak to me. He wouldn't have me anywhere near it when we filmed it. I had to... Claire asked the questions. I was 100 miles away, and I would put the questions on afterwards, because I didn't want to have to explain it to the audience why someone else was asking him questions. But that was a real shock, who he really was.
I'm going to take one or two more. Oh my gosh, so many questions.
I didn't want to keep going to see them when I wasn't filming them, because then it gets incredibly complicated. Because if I went in every year and then took the best of the 7 years, I think the whole thing would lose its focus, because I like to keep them talking about the same things, so we can all compare them. So I deliberately never go and see them between films. Or I can talk. Sometimes we have an event. If I have a movie opening in London or something, they would all come, and we'd have a nice meal and all. So I wanted to be generous to them, but I didn't want to become part of their lives, because otherwise, if I knew everything what was going on, I'd have a 600-minute film, and then I'd be having nervous breakdowns as what bits I should have in. So, I tried to narrow it down in that way. I mean, in major events, obviously, but I didn't like bringing everything to a conclusion on the seventh in the 7th year of it. I just picked in that year what was going on, and obviously stuff that had been hanging around in the wind. But I didn't want to get too much material that I couldn't handle, or it might be so distant from each other that we would be in a muddle. So much as I wanted to find out what was going on each time, I held back unless there was real trouble. And always the real trouble was when we asked them to do it, and some of them didn't want to do it and all that. Then we had to, bring the fire brigade in and put them, wet them down a bit, and say how lucky they were to be here, and don't be so silly. Anyway, so
I've got time for one more question, so I want the best. Good question. She was asking, when you go back and look at the old films, do you also look at the outtakes that you didn't put into the films?
Well, yeah, because in there was a bit of a shock, which I didn't know about until almost 49 up. I thought the studio were keeping everything, but all they kept was the finished program. I was furious because I mean they were so good, the company, and being loyal to it and encouraging to it and all that kind of stuff, but not to keep everything was beyond belief. I mean, I have fucking tons of stuff, so it wasn't that it was wrecking, but especially when I went back right into when there were 7, all I had was the cuts on 7, but you know, it would have been so much more interesting if I had more stuff at 7 that I could go back on. So that was the only complaint I ever had about from the company was because they never told me they were going to do it, going to wipe everything that wasn't actually on the air. But did I answer a question, or did I have?
That was a good question because I learned a lot from the that answer. I did not know that.
Right. No, well, I didn't know it, Tom.
Well, again, the film is going to open at Film Forum on November 27th. I think Michael's going to be back in town then doing some conversations, so send your friends. We're so honored to have Michael Apted as our Lifetime Achievement Award winner at Doc NYC. Thank you very much for coming, and thanks to Michael Apted.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very painless.
I failed.